Hi. I want to talk about this question of how do you, if you want to do good things in the world, but actually the world is pretty big and complicated, and you don't understand all of it, what are you actually supposed to do? Um, and I guess there's like, I'm in talking about this, trying to get at this question of like, how should we think about how to do good? Um, and there's this classical decision theoretic frame where you just ask, well, what is the best thing to do? Let's consider all the things we can do, and then we'll work out which of them is best. Um, and I think that this is it's like not clear how you should think about that in cases where you can't actually consider all the things that you can do, which is like essentially every possible case in the real world. Um, and so, like, we could use heuristics, which are like, well, you think through some of the options, and you try to make some estimates of how good those are, which might approximate this kind of classical decision theoretic frame. And maybe sometimes that is actually the best way to approach things, but it's not obvious that it's the best way to approach things. We could try asking other questions, like, are there other ways to contribute to good happening in the world around you that don't look so straightforwardly like, well, you just try to form your models of what's going on and choose the thing which is best and then go and do that. Ideally, I feel like there should be much more of a field of study here, both like kind of getting into like people having worked out different models and also like even potentially a kind of a science of it and people studying like, well, actually, if you take these different approaches, how well do they turn out in different circumstances? I don't have anything like a science of this. I'm just going to present like, okay, here are some possible ways of thinking about it, and here are some takes about things that I think might be helpful. Okay, first of all, here's the kind of setup where this classical model seems like it's particularly well suited. You've got a pretty simple world, and you've got a pretty rich understanding of what's going on. Obviously, in reality, when it's never going to be this clean. But I think that sometimes you can be interacting with a system that is fairly well self-contained and you understand pretty well, and then using something like this basically is correct. And so, I think that in some cases, kind of using game theory to analyze a simple game, like I can go like this. And also, there may be cases where, well, actually just the different courses of action that you could take might have wildly different effect sizes. And so it's worth just trying to calculate out kind of like roughly what is going on, and some approximation to that. But yeah, I do think this can come up. I mostly don't think it's realistic, but it's worth having in mind as one of the kind of paradigm cases. Maybe the sort of like next paradigm case to consider is really just think that there's a complex world out there. We don't fully understand it, but still kind of holding ourselves apart from it, and still mostly in this mode of, well, we want to work out what the best thing to do is. We want to build our models of it. We want to kind of have our understanding, and then we'll choose the thing which is best according to the models that we understand are incomplete, but still we don't have anything better to do than this. This feels kind of like classical science. There's the world over there. Here are we trying to understand it, and we can go and do things there. And we might be building statistical models of things. We might be building theories about how things work. I feel like a bunch of like development economics has some of this flavor. It's saying, well, there's a world over there. We'd like to help. How can we understand that? And what can we measure? How can we assess things? Or how can we build models of that? Um, and I think there's quite a bit to be said for this kind of approach. It doesn't add in some of the complexities, which will come in further along, but I think that it is a powerful lens for saying, look, no, let's try to understand what's going on in the world, and let's see what we can say and where we could get to as a result of that. Um, I guess why not just stick with that? Well, actually, we're kind of in this other world. Like we ourselves as actors are in this big complex world, which has a bunch of other people in doing stuff. And we're not really like, oh, we're kind of off to one side, doing a separate intervention. We just need to think really hard about what the intervention is going to be, and then go and do the best thing. In fact, like just lots of choices that we make in tons of different ways, and including kind of like micro level choices that we're not even like really seriously consciously thinking through, will have impacts that go out into the world. To some extent, this is because other people might be thinking about how we about our actions, or about even like how we're thinking about this. So this is kind of like the general problem is there is a big, complicated, messy world. All of my worlds in this talk are kind of like roughly triangles, but they're triangles of different levels of complexity. And yeah, what to do there? And I think that this case of other people modeling you is an important part of what's adding on the extra complexity. I kind of don't think this is everything, but like, yeah, if you're legible, then that means that other people can make better predictions and make better plans. And if you're reliable at something, other people can rely on you, and then that helps them to make better plans, and helps them to be able to actually execute on their plans better, and maybe frees up their attention. And particularly if you're working in a world where in a way which is cooperative with people around you, and that they are have kind of broadly similar goals. There's quite a lot to be said for this. There's also things about like, we can have all of our models about what's going on in the world, and our best attempt at working out what's good to do, and we can totally be wrong. In fact, like, in some sense, the default state of everybody everywhere is to be wrong about things. We can be wrong to different degrees. There can be like different levels of complexity there, but just because like we have our current best model of things, and we might think, well, we don't have anything better to act on than our best model, it still seems worth being in touch with the fact that that model is probably in some regards mistaken, and that other people, like in some cases, may have a better sense of what's going on than we do. And so if we just act in such a way where we're kind of projecting certainty about the models, because at some point, you have to choose a model that you're acting according to and act. But if we act with kind of certainty there, I think it makes it harder for other people to actually get to the bottom of things and learn things. And so there's if you can just be transparent about your reasons for believing things, then that might have good impacts on other people in ways that you can't trace out. And it's kind of the potential impacts there are more complex than what's going on than you can necessarily model. But that there could still be a bunch of benefits from that. And yeah, I guess I do generally think that if we're trying to do good in the world, we're often doing this as part of a larger system. And maybe the larger system isn't entirely, it doesn't have to be built around its explicit goal is doing good in the world. Often it has some purpose. It could be the healthcare or the education system of a country. where the purpose is not like, oh, it's just kind of wants to maximize the abstract good. No, it's concerned with getting good health outcomes or getting good education outcomes in that country. It has a certain remit, and that remit is in some sense like contributing towards the larger good, but it's not like an explicit aim. But yeah, I think that within a system, different people are going to be interacting and doing different things and benefiting from things that other people have done, and there's a question of how all of this fits together. And there's a question of like, well, if we want to do good things, how do we interact with these systems? And like, what is the proper way to orient to being in such a system? It's not just one system. Normally there's a whole bunch of different things that are going on in the world, and kinds of these formal or informal structures and systems of people interacting and passing information around there. And we are normally part of many systems at once, and then there are many other systems that we're not really part of. And we can also be parts of systems to differing degrees. And in some cases, something can be like a large part of what we're interacting with. In other cases, it might be a much smaller part. And yeah, and like, of course, it's not really actually that these systems are even separable. They're kind of complicatedly overlapping and intertwined. They don't have clean boundaries. They don't like we might have a picture of kind of how we kind of naturally, like, we want to carve this into multiple systems. Well, here's my family and here's my professional network, and like, but that's a carving up that we're imposing it to help our understanding, and like, these systems don't necessarily behave exactly as we expect them to or perceive them to. It kind of doesn't matter. I'm just like, to a first approximation, there's a bunch of systems around there, and then we are interacting with those, and somehow, like, we have to try and do things as a result. And so the question that I'm kind of have been building up to is, well, okay, given that you're in these systems, the world is like really complex. It's too complex to fully understand what's going on, and it's also kind of complex in this sense of, like, you are in it and other people are paying attention to you. Well, now what should you do? What should you pay attention to? How should you act? And like, I definitely don't have anything like a complete answer to this, but I want to gesture at a couple of give people a little bit of maybe of language for trying to think about this. So one kind of archetype that we could consider is a role player, where you just think, well, I'm in this system. I understand locally what the interface is with other people interacting with me are, and I don't need to look at what's going on in the big picture. I don't need to think about that. I am just going to focus on doing an excellent job of the thing in front of me, of like at the place where I am. And that makes it easy for other people to predict what I'm going to do and to rely on that. And I don't need to pay attention to the bigger picture to work out how to do a good job of the role in the place where I am. And there's kind of an element of trust that, overall the system that you're contributing to is doing something worthwhile, and that it's good for you to go and do that. At the other end of the spectrum, almost, is a kind of like archetype of the strategist. They just try and look at the biggest picture. They say, okay, how is the whole world going? What is important here? And like, what are the most important things across this entire giant world for anybody to be pushing on? And let's kind of go after that. And the strategist is not very interested in these details of gears or what it means to do kind of an excellent job locally. And it's, maybe a few gears in this big picture will be relevant for kind of understanding the biggest picture dynamics. But mostly they're really looking at the zoomed out thing. And not at the local stuff around them. Okay, I mean that's great because it's we want people to be understanding our place in the world, how things are going, what we should be building towards. But it also means that they're not actually going to be so helpful to interact with in a bunch of ways, because if they're not thinking about, well, what are the good ways, what are the ways to be helpful to these people that I actually have the kind of cog interfaces with, probably they're not going to do a great job of being helpful to the people with the cog interfaces. So this archetype is also, it's capturing something important, which I think is not captured by the role player, and then it also has its own blind spots. Yeah. Okay. So probably neither of these archetypes are really the actual ideal thing to do, but we have to do something. And indeed, why am I asking about this at all? It's because as boundedly rational actors, we don't get to pay attention to everything. We don't get to think through everything. We have to somehow shepherd our limited attention. How can we do that? And my thought was, well, if we have some kind of way of orienting to the different ways that you could be orienting here, maybe it'll be a bit easier to think about. And I'm interested in, are there good ways for us to try to blend the benefits here? And so here is an overly specific proposed approach. I've put some numbers on this. I don't really believe the numbers. And indeed, the numbers should, for sure, vary a lot with different people. Nonetheless, I have given numbers in service of being concrete, so that people can kind of understand, okay, roughly what is Owen actually even saying here. So getting into that. And the idea here is, well, you're going to be in some systems, and you're going to have to give some attention to the big picture, and also a bunch of attention to the kind of local stuff. And in fact, I'm actually suggesting that on average, it will be right to give really most attention to the local stuff. And so this kind of first bucket, I'm saying maybe should have about 70% of people's attention typically, which is within the system acting such that you think that somebody in roughly your position should act. I've added this rider, which is if the system were a slightly better idealized version of itself, which is trying to. I'll talk about that a bit more on the next slide. But I'm kind of not just wanting to act with the system as it is now and kind of do whatever's locally best, but to try to nudge the system towards improving as a whole. And I think that this aiming for not kind of full utopia, this is the totally idealized way that things should work, but aiming to contribute to a world in which things are working a bit better than they actually do, I think can be a step towards actually getting there. And then with a small fraction of our attention, but not a vanishingly small fraction of our attention, we should really think about well, which systems should we even be part of? What roles should we be playing? How do we decide this? How do we move around? And so I think when should we be adding capacity to certain places and systems, or when should we be saying, okay, no, actually, I want to reduce my obligations here to free up attention so that I can go and interact in other places. And so I've said 10% of time, and this is in some sense strategy work, localized strategy work, trying to think about what are the kind of best opportunities to be taking. Well, I don't think that uh, most of your action should be flowing from this kind of like, well, what are the best opportunities? Because I think that after you've stepped into a system, then it's pretty important to be in this first mode of like the role player. How do you do an excellent job in this position that you are now in? And I think that locally as a way of action guiding is often better than trying to kind of connect all the way through to your view of what is the most important. Um, but I think that for questions of kind of allocating a capacity and choosing what kinds of things to spend time on, what kinds of things, what kind of systems to integrate yourself into, it is worth giving it some serious thought. And then, I mean, not actually entirely based on your own models. Like I think here, a bunch of being responsive to the implicit asks and needs of other people around you can also be pretty helpful. And then this third category is, well, actually, yeah, just try and understand the big picture. Try and zoom out. Try and understand. And here I would say pay more attention to the bits of the triangle that are relatively close to you, because that's a place where you might be able to spot gaps, and you might be able to spot that there are more things that are worth doing. But some attention even to like the very big parts of the picture. Yeah, I guess that's like here is a model for how we might approach things. Sorry, that's kind of abstract as I've given it. I'm sure we could concretize to a bunch of examples, but uh, I often think in abstractions. Sorry to the extent that that's hard to follow. Um, yeah, and maybe just a couple of quick remarks to wrap up on um, these elements of trust. Um, and I think that, like my saying, well, often actually it is good to put a big part of attention onto just, but not all of your attention onto uh, uh, trying to do a good job in the role that you're in, is some trust that like there is something which is happening well as part of the larger system that you're part of, and even if you don't understand it all, because in fact none of us will understand it all, but that if you're contributing in a in like a good, generally helpful, epistemically virtuous way, you're often helping other parts of the system to work well and do whatever their thing is, even when you can't trace through all of the implications. Yeah, and then this second point that I was alluding to a minute ago, I think that I often have some trust that if I act as though the system were a slightly better idealized version of itself, it will help it to become such. There's a kind of thing of like if you like people are often sort of responsive to expectations that you have, and if you expect people to step up and be cooperative and work together, often like almost by expecting that you help to make it more likely, and people are like, oh yeah, I will do that. And if instead you kind of expect them to be oh, everyone's just really looking out for themselves, and uh, uh, kind of like game theoretic, playing the odds to try to get the best outcome, people will also be responsive to that and act more in that way. And so I'm not suggesting, hey, be naive to the ways that these things can go wrong. I'm like, well, absolutely, in fact, think through what are the ways that it could be abused, and try to close that off, and try to establish the incentives such that um, people will be incentivized to act in good cooperative ways, but also just try to like to some extent to expect that, and to set things up so that it will help it go well if people do step up, and if people do act a little overall kind of a little better, and the system acts a little better than we kind of maybe overall expect, and I think that can help to help to prepare the path for the system becoming more coherent and more like a good version of itself. Okay, that's all I have. I uh, I don't know. I would love to hear about other ways that people think might be sensible as like ways to try to orient to this whole kind of trying to do good question. It feels really important to me, and I feel like we don't always have the right tools for thinking about it, and so yeah, more trying to start a conversation than say I've got all the answers.